Welcome to the Close the Chapter podcast. I am Kristen Boyce, a licensed marriage and family therapist with a private practice, Pathways to Healing Counseling. Through conversations, education, strategies, and shared stories, we will be closing the chapter on all the thoughts, feelings, people, and circumstances that don't serve you anymore and open the door to possibilities and the real you. You won't want to miss an episode, so be sure to subscribe. Welcome to this week's Close the Chapter podcast. I am so glad you're with me today. I had a great conversation with Israa Nasir, and we talked about toxic productivity. She has a book coming out in November with that title, and we really deconstruct the roots of productivity, the emotions it's connected to, what drives it, and how to really break free from it. And I share personal examples of my own life and how we get our identity from work and achievement and getting recognized and accolades and words of affirmation and all the things, and how we can kind of break free from that. We are recording this in May. She has the book coming out in November. And so we are launching this episode in July. So I hope you're having a great summer so far and you are able to be in the present moment. Let me tell you a little bit about our guest today. Israa is a psychotherapist, speaker, and founder of the digital mental health brand Well Guide. She curates meaningful experiences through therapy, workshops, engaging creative content, and speaking engagements to further amplify the message of emotional wellness and personal growth. Her work is focused on transforming the way we talk about mental health, taking it from a place of shame to a place of empowerment, with a special focus on identity formation and healing for the AAPI immigrant, which is the first and second generation experience. And her book is getting ready to launch in November on toxic productivity, and she was excited to share it. She did have a family emergency at the end of our conversation, but we were able to tie it up and really talk about the most important takeaway of our conversation. So if you struggle with this, you struggle with perfectionism, shame, guilt, comparison, your identity coming from your role, your achievements, doing things right, being the good person, then this episode is for you. And I hope it's helpful. And if it is, feel free to share it with someone else so you can talk together and have a deeper conversation. Without further ado, here is our deeper dive into toxic productivity. Welcome to this week's Close the Chapter podcast. I am so excited about this topic. It's not one I've talked about too much, but if you've listened to my own journey on overachieving and my early days of working in corporate America and burning the candle at both ends and getting our worth and value from achievement, being productive, and really getting that accolades from parents, outside folks. And then you feel like you have worth, you have value, you are somebody, then this is the episode for you. So I am so excited to dive into our topic with Israa. Yay, welcome.
Hey, how are you?
I'm so glad you're here because I know we're going to be talking about shame and guilt, comparison and perfectionism and emotions and what's underneath driving all of that. So I thought we'd jump in and talk about toxic productivity. I know you have a book coming out. Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm very excited.
Yeah. So let's dive in and talk about how did you even come up with this topic and why is this like a passion of yours?
One of the ways I started kind of thinking about productivity in this like very unhealthy way was genuinely through my own experiences. So, I'm a child of immigrants. I'm an immigrant myself, and I'm also South Asian. So those three identities are very focused on achievement behaviors. And as a woman as well, we're primed to be overachievers in every domain of our life. And about like 6, 7 years ago, I started feeling very disconnected from the work that I was doing, even though I was working in my field, like the field that I love, right? Mental health. But I was also starting to feel disconnected from the rest of my life. I was no longer enjoying the things that I used to enjoy, going to shows and musicals, like my calendar was overpacked. And it just felt like I was checking off a list, just waiting to feel like I have arrived. Everything I'm working towards, I've finally gotten it. And even though on paper it seemed like I had gotten it, it just didn't feel like that on the inside. So I'm a therapist and I'm kind of very well trained to look at the why behind the what. So I'd identified the what and I was kind of feeling like a low grade type of burnout. And so I started digging into the why of it because honestly, to me, I genuinely felt like, well, I've done all the things. I've ticked off all the boxes, like why it has that feeling of yay, not come. And so as I started doing research on motivation, human motivation, socialization, like all those theories, I started picking up on this theme that I felt like people were not talking about enough is our productivity behaviors are often driven by our emotions. And if we want to have healthy productivity, we need to have healthy emotion regulation. And if we don't see the connection between the two things, we'll keep changing surface level behaviors. We'll do time management and Pomodoros and lists. And we try to do all these things. But if the emotions are not being managed, you're always going to struggle. And so that's kind of the genesis of the book.
Okay, so let's dive into emotional management. People hear that and they're like, yeah, what does it have to do with productivity? Let's dive into the connection between the two.
Yeah. So the connection between the two is human behavior is essentially motivated by two things. We are either motivated to maximize pleasure or minimize pain. Whether it's you as a parent, worker, friend, like all of the labels aside, that is the foundational mechanics of our motivation. And the way emotions connect to productivity is we tend to lean into productivity to either make ourselves feel better, so maximize the pleasure of someone is giving us value, or we go headfirst into productivity because we want to minimize pain, pain of being left behind or FOMO or shame, not being good enough. And so those emotions are so strong, they're so deep, and they're so hard coded because we are raised to kind of relate to productivity in this way from childhood, or we see our parents do it. It's really hard to identify. So that's kind of why people are so unaware of the relationship between emotions and productivity, because we just don't think about those two things in the same way. And I think the time we are in, the way our society is structured, we have a lot of hustle culture. There's a lot of like hustle and grind, sleep when you're dead, girl boss. And even though we're kind of coming out of that era, I do think that mentality is still there. And especially in millennial and Gen Z clients of mine, I see this very strongly. And the interesting thing I've noticed in the last few years is traditionally we think about burnout and productivity as workplace related things. But we're starting to see the research is starting to show that this mindset of optimizing, of being the best, of using every single minute to get something done is actually bleeding into our parenting. It's bleeding into our romantic relationships. It's bleeding into our friendships. So it's no longer a thing that only exists in the workplace. And I think partly that's because our work and our life has really blurred over the last 6, 7 years. I would say people don't really have a great distinction. People have monetized their hobbies. Everything is outcome driven. And anytime you put an outcome into something, toxic productivity will show up.
Yeah, I think that is one of the things that so many of us struggle with. I know I do. Like, we like a good outcome. We
Yeah.
want a good outcome. And so that's what we're striving for because then we feel better. How does shame, because we know that shame of not feeling good enough and guilt, like some people will say, clients will come in and go, and I struggle with this too at times, like, I didn't get anything done today. I just feel lazy. And we feel guilty if we're not getting like the laundry done, the meals done, our emails returned, our texts returned. How does that drive guilt and shame us trying to continue this pattern of being productive?
Yeah, so guilt and shame are very similar, but are distinct in their mechanics. And so they definitely always come together, but the way it drives us or how we react to it is different. So shame is the voice that's telling you that there's something wrong with you, like I'm lazy, and that will activate shame. And so in order to not feel the shame, we kind of either externalize and we do stuff to change that feeling, or we avoid. That's where you might see avoidance behaviors or numbing behaviors like just scrolling on your phone, that black and white thinking, oh, you know what? I didn't work out in the morning, so I'm such a lazy person. I guess I won't work out at all. It's all or nothing. What you're trying to do is you're trying to cope with that feeling. Guilt, on the other hand, is saying that you did something wrong. And because of that, guilt is a little bit more of an action oriented emotion. We do tend to act more to alleviate guilt. And so guilt can be like, I wasted time. I wasted so much time, because you're kind of like what's called couch rotting nowadays. I don't know if you've heard that
Oh,
phrase.
yeah. I've totally
Yeah.
heard that phrase.
And so you kind of like get up from the couch and you tend to overwork yourself. Like something that needed 2 hours, you'll try to jam into just 1 hour to get done. And like suddenly you're cleaning the house and doing the dishes and and you're doing everything really, really fast with that really stressed mindset. And both of these things drive us to continue to want to do more, because eventually through productivity, through toxic productivity, what we're really trying to do is we're trying to get a sense of belonging, that we're good enough, that we are as good as everybody else, that we belong here, that my achievements make me valuable, and all of that makes me lovable.
Yeah. And I think this plays a part in, like we see on social media, like this perfect house, or they have these perfect organized closets. Everything is just aesthetically pleasing. So when you have someone come to your house, you're like working hard to make sure the image, the house looks perfect. You've got the updated furniture, you've got it all organized. And so what that does is it creates such a stress response in the nervous system. How does perfectionism contribute to driving this whole toxic productivity?
I find perfectionism is such a hugely applauded trait in our society. People kind of use it as a label that they feel really proud of. Oh, I'm type A, I'm a perfectionist. And I don't necessarily want to knock anybody if they feel it has brought a lot of value to their life. But I think in its most foundational form, it is a little bit of a harmful mechanism. It is a coping mechanism that we utilize to work through anxiety. Perfectionism gives us a false sense of control or low self-worth. So if you think that there's going to be a mistake, your one couch is messy, then someone's going to judge you and they're going to think that you are not a good enough person, that you're a messy person, you're a lazy person, or you don't have any style. So the foundation behind perfectionism is always coming from a place of deficiency. And so we feel deficient in some way, and the desire is to have everything perfect on the outside. And it has a lot of merit. I think it gets you far in our capitalist society. So I don't want people to let go of it. What I want is for people to have a flexible mindset about it. So aim to do things to the best of your capability, not somebody else's yardstick. Aim to do the best of what you want to do and have space for mistakes and have flexibility for change, have some adaptability. You can still aim high. When I talk about this book or this concept, a lot of people mistake it for kind of like an anti-productivity. We
Mm.
shouldn't be aiming high. People will often say, like, well, what's wrong with productivity? Like, why are you against it? And the reality is, like, I'm not against productivity at all. Is what I want is for people to have a healthier relationship to it. And so perfectionism makes us have a very unhealthy relationship to productivity, because things will never be perfect and we will continue to aim for it and we will continue to drive on an empty tank. And there is no destination. It's a mirage. That's why kind of having a flexible mindset, having some adaptability, having some space for mistakes and failures is really, really important.
How do you think our childhoods play a part in this? Because I think it's a disservice if we don't drop into looking at the roots of how this even begins. Yes, we have cultural aspects, and I think those are huge. And I think it's cultural. I think it's childhood. I think it's us not learning to connect to emotions. So let's talk about childhood and how that impacts us wanting to be
Yeah.
super productive.
I'm trained in psychodynamics, so everything is about about
I
childhood for
know.
me.
People don't like that. And I'm like, but
I
we have
know.
to go back to understand.
Yeah. And it's not about blaming your parents. I actually even say this in the book. I want to be really mindful that There are people who study in that way, and I think there's a space for that. For me, it's about learning. It's about getting data points about your conditioning so that you can say, you know what? I like this part of me, so I'm going to keep it. And these things are not helpful, so I'm going to let them go. And that's a hard process. So it's less about blaming your parents and kind of getting into that domain. It's more about what am I learning from this right now so that I can enact some change. And the way our childhood plays into productivity behaviors is it creates the foundational definition of what it means to be productive. And so if you look up the definition in the dictionary, it's a very outcomes oriented definition. But a big part of productivity is how you use your time. It's our relationship to time. Do we have a transactional relationship to time? I use it, I get it, I gain from it. And so those are things we kind of absorb in our home environment. So if you grew up in a house where your parents had you doing like 4 different after school activities, one after the other, you didn't really have free time to just unstructured play. Everything was about getting something in form of improvement and service of growth, then you're going to grow up to think that that's how time is meant to be used. So resting is going to feel antithetical to that. So you're not going to rest and you're going to burn out. You might feel very shameful if you spend a night watching Netflix instead of reading that new book that came out. So that's one way our family can affect that. The second way our childhood affects productivity is the spoken and unspoken demands and expectations that our parents put on us. So the spoken ones are very clear. I want you to get good grades. You can't get a B. There are families where that happens. You do not get a B, you only get A's, and that's all you do. The unspoken ones are the way parents kind of inadvertently will negotiate belonging with their kids. So if you're the kid who gets the A's, maybe they tell all their friends about you. Maybe you get the extra dessert. Maybe you get a little bit of a present. So you suddenly start realizing that, wait, if I do well, people love me more. And so like that's how that connection forms between productivity, achievement, and belonging and self-worth. And so these are like really important dynamics that kind of set the foundation. And the last one I'll speak about is our peer group. Our friends, our teachers, they really matter because our parents, of course, matter, but our peer group and our friends also really matter because how are teachers engaging with you? What are you getting rewarded for at school? Are you being compared to your peers? And how are you getting acceptance and value and identity in the school environment? Is it through achievement? Is it through perfectionism? And so I think that, again, it feeds into this foundation.
I hope this sparks so many memories for folks as they're listening, kind of floating back and going, yeah, all those boxes were checked in some way, or maybe not all of them, but a couple of them, because you can go back to high school, middle school, your achievements were rewarded with awards and accolades. And then if you're getting not the attention you need at home or want at home, maybe there's some neglect going on, or both your parents are busy working and you're getting that elsewhere, it feeds it. It's like it feeds that hole in your soul that you're craving, that someone says, I see you and I see all you're doing, and reinforces it. And that just keeps reinforcing it because that feels good to get that.
Mm-hmm.
You see that? I mean, is that part of what you've noticed in your research?
Yeah, it becomes like a feedback loop. It just becomes such a tight feedback loop. And then you bring that into relationships. And like, I think a really important downside is the opposite also becomes true. So if we're getting a lot of love when we are providing this achievement-oriented behavior, what happens when we don't provide it? We don't get love. We are not lovable. We are not valued. We're not bringing anything to the table. They will leave me if I'm not perfect. If I'm not the perfect wife, my husband will leave me. If I'm not the perfect husband or partner, my kids might reject me if everything is not perfect for them. And so that fear becomes a really powerful driver.
Yeah. So let's talk about, how do we work through? What are some of the things, if you're going, oh my gosh, this is me, or I have traits of this, or I can identify with what you both are saying, where do we begin to, I know awareness is key. So this might be sparking awareness. Now, what do we do?
I think that First, really understanding what the mechanics you operate in, because everyone doesn't like operate from a space of perfectionism, guilt, shame, and comparison. So, what is the dominant one for you? So, if this is sparking almost like a recognition, like a familiarity, then I will say definitely go into the awareness a little bit more. So, what I encourage people to do is to keep like an audit tracker of the things you commit to, the things you say yes to, how that makes you feel. Try to understand the relationship between your emotions and your achievement behaviors. And also look beyond just work. So think about like if you are really involved in your work's committee, like, I don't know, some volunteer social committee, what does that bring you? What does that give you? What happens if somebody else chairs it? So try to see, understand the emotions that are driving it. Recognize your dominant emotion, then you kind of have to work through that. So if comparing yourself is your dominant emotion, like comparison, then really working on dismantling that whole idea of how can we not compare ourselves to other people. So there's like so many strategies that you can use for that. So you can first do an audit of the things that are good for you, that are working for you, that are successes. Because when people compare themselves to other people and they're driving to toxic productivity, we do not appreciate our wins. We dismiss our wins, we ignore them, we devalue them, we externalize them. We're like, oh, I got the promotion because they needed to give it to somebody, instead of I got the promotion because I work hard. So making some changes in your thought process, really getting involved. And I think journaling is a really powerful tool to understand your patterns. So it's a really big question to answer. It really just depends on the thing that you're struggling with.
I think the biggest piece that I see in this thread is your willingness to look within to say, okay, what am I feeling? What is driving this? What am I looking for? What am I hoping this is going to give me? Because it's just a shot in the arm, because it's going to move to the next thing. It's not going to be sustainable. Like it's not going to create contentment. And I see this a lot with clients that retire and their identity was hooked into maybe their company they owned, or their role or their position or their financial reward that they got from their job. And then they feel really lost.
Yeah.
They feel purposeless, meaningless. Did you uncover that when someone they're retiring, they don't feel productive anymore? Their identity is
Yeah. I would,
connected to what they
yeah,
do.
I would say that this is something that people feel even when they're not retired, like in today's world. And I think about this as like the millennial generation is kind of aging into their 40s and their 50s. You think about like the way they were kind of raised in this like meritocracy. And then, of course, like even people, Gen X, who is retiring right now. But even if you're not retired, you can have that same kind of connection to your work, your identity. So if you go to a party, people often introduce themselves with their jobs. And so my antidote to that is to A, not wait until you're retired to change the relationship that you have. B is try to infuse doing things in your routine for the sake of doing it only. So sometimes we just don't do anything for the sake of doing it. We're reading a book because we're doing the 12 books a year challenge. We are gardening because we suddenly decided to start a gardening Instagram. So I think it's like everything starts becoming metrics oriented, and we don't do anything for the pure sake of doing it, period. And that prevents us from enjoying the process of what we're doing. And if we can actually tap into the joy in the process of doing something, it gives us some respite from having our identity only centered on our work, because then we start becoming more than that. And what happens is when people are very, very laser focused on work, they're not spending time doing anything else that can give them purpose or identity. And so to try to expand your repertoire of things you're doing things for the sake of doing them is a really helpful way to kind of detach from toxic productivity.
Yeah, I would add to that with inner child work. I know, here we go. The therapist in me is coming out. I like going back, figuring out where are the roots of this lie. Because it's interesting. My husband just had back surgery and he's a triathlete. He does barefoot water skiing. Like he's very active. And when that is taken out and he may not be able to do those things again, he may have to modify. There's a feeling of feeling lost. Like that created a sense of something to look forward to. It does tie into productivity because then he felt like he's being productive. He's doing something with his health. So it's a big journey. It's like a breaking open of your identity in a way to go, well, he said, yeah, he's saying recently, like we're processing it. I don't have anything to look forward to.
Yeah.
Because that kind of kept him like work. I'm going to work towards the next, for those that might be listening, the next promotion, or I'm going to be working towards my next kid, or I'm going to be like, there's always this next. How do you help people through that when they use that to kind of motivate themselves?
Yeah. And it's a powerful motivation too, by the way. It's so powerful. It has such a strong outcome. Like if you plan and you work towards something, you will get the thing you're working towards. And so again, like I don't want to take that away from people, but I think what we lose in doing that is we actually lose our ability to be present. And that is a really big problem right now, including myself. People are having a really hard time being present in the moment. And so we're always doing more than one thing at the same time. We're doing multiple projects at the same time. We're doing multiple tasks at the same time. So in order to kind of like deconstruct this is the solution is like, it's in your smaller habits. Working towards a purpose or this and that is so big. But I think what we really have to do is we have to retrain our brains to be more present in our day-to-day life. So everybody talks about mindfulness and meditation, and people are like, oh, this is just like a throwaway term that we're just kind of overusing. But I think it speaks to something really important is if we can learn how to be present and have gratitude for the moment we are in, and we really build that practice and we really build that muscle, it does kind of roll up into your worldview. And what that will help you do is be present in the life stage you are in, to be grateful for it, to work on that, and to be there instead of looking to the next.
What is the biggest takeaway for someone that's listening that they want to start working on this? What would be their biggest takeaway?
My biggest takeaway for anybody, and this was for myself as well, is to start small. You must make the changes in your daily habits. It's just too big to try to just totally change your relationship to productivity. So even in the book, there's so many like exercises, but I always say, pick one. Just pick one chapter for 30 days, implement that into your life. And it doesn't have to be something you do for 60 minutes a day. You can start 3 times a week. You can start for 5 minutes a day. I'm trying to be more present and mindful and really improve that skill for myself. So I'm like meditating for 5 minutes a day only, because that's what I can do right now. I feel like my attention starts taking me elsewhere. There's a million things going on, but I do commit to 5 minutes a day. And I know that that's going to roll up. I know that if I do it for 4 weeks, by the 5th week, I can probably extend it to 10 minutes. So I think for me, my biggest takeaway is if you recognize that you have a struggle with productivity, or if you're just wanting to live a little bit more of like an intentional life, start small, start in the daily habits, because that is what rolls up into our lifestyle.
Awesome. Where can people find you if they want to get the book, Toxic Productivity?
Yeah.
Where do they find you?
So my website is like the hub of every connection you can have to me. So you can head to my website, the book will be there. And through my website, you can go into my Instagram. I'm very active there as well. And finally, I have a newsletter. There's 2 that go out a month, and I do like a monthly meetup with my subscribers. So that's also another place that you could connect with me.
We'll put that all in the show notes for everybody wanting to connect. Thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate your heart and soul, and can't wait for the book launch.
Thank you so much. This was a great conversation.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening to the Close the Chapter podcast. My hope is that you took home some actionable steps along with motivation, inspiration, and hope for making sustainable change in your life. If you enjoyed this episode, click the subscribe button to be sure to get the updated episodes every week, and share with a friend or a family member. For more information about how to get connected, visit Kristen, Kristen, Boyce, Boice.com. Thanks, and have a great day.